Hi, I'm Ashy, and today I'm continuing my watercolor birth month animal series with November, which is the pig. So I wanted to find an idea for birth month that wasn't birthstones, and I came across this list of birth month animals, and I thought that was really fun because I like animals and I thought they would be fun and challenging to paint. So I created 3 different styles for each month: a more traditional version, a whimsical version with flowers, and a cartoony like baby version. And that was just to appeal to a bunch of different tastes and styles. And I had so much fun creating these, so I hope that you enjoy these tutorials. Now, of note, the tutorials are not real time. They are sped up because each one takes a little bit under an hour for these ones, and that would just be way too long of a video for YouTube to do 3 hours. So I did speed them up, but I did not cut out any of the content from start to finish. It's all there. You see all of the techniques that I use for painting. I also kept the real-time instructions that I gave while I was painting so that you get that thought process and the techniques that I'm using that I described while I was painting. I just kind of sped up the video around it, but you can see from start to finish how I create these cards. So I really hope that you give one or all of them a go. If you don't feel like trying all of them, I do have prints available for purchase at shop.craftywithashy.com, so you can check that out. But I really hope you give one or all of these a shot. They turned out really good. I was a little on the fence about pig just because pigs are cute, but then when I was drawing them, it felt weird because their eyes are small and it felt like they weren't going to turn out good. And I don't know why, I just had like that feeling, but then I was really happy with how they turned out. So just, stick with it and give it a go. Let's jump into the tutorials.
I'm going to start by just getting in the basic shape of the pig at the height that I want it. So we kind of have the curved backside here, and then it's going to angle down toward the front, and then we come into the head down at an angle and then curve out for the snout. Then the nose is kind of the upside down, like heart shaped almost. So we're going to do kind of up to a curved point on the top and then come down and around the side, and then it's going to curve back up on this side, but because we're seeing it at an angle, we're not going to see that other side very much. And then nostril will be somewhere like that. And then the mouth comes up from the nose and curves a little bit. And then the bottom of the mouth comes from kind of behind the tip of the nose. It's not all the way out at the nose. It's almost kind of flat there to the back of the jaw, kind of there-ish. And then it comes back a little bit of a curve toward the legs. The back leg is going to be coming just kind of behind that jaw, curved on a little bit. It's almost straight, but just a slight curve there. And then the back part of the leg, same thing, like just almost straight down. The front leg is going to come down also fairly straight, kind of angle it forward some, and then angle it back just a little bit. So I think he's moving forward just a little, and then the back part of that leg comes out to a point there and then ankles in toward the front. And then we have the belly of the pig to the back legs. So the first leg here, so it's angling back, and then that's kind of the elbow and then coming forward. Go. And then the other leg is going to come down. There's the hip to, again, that kind of like elbow joint there, and then the back here. Okay. Sort of like that. Nothing here. There's going to be a little bit of a shadow where that shoulder comes out. Okay, now we got to get in the eyes and the ears. Exaggerate this angle just a little bit more, go down a little bit and curve. But here you're just going to see a little indication of one eye, and the other eye is going to come off of the snout. On this side, I'm just going to do like a little half circle on the bottom, a line across the top, and the ears in reference to the eye. I'm going to kind of go up from the outer edge a little bit and put in the ear there. And it's going to come to a point and curve around the other side. This wide opening there. And there will be some shading in here to get where it's kind of curved over. Maybe cut just a little bit bigger and more angled up to end kind of closer to the back. Let's get the other ear in and then decide if we like it. So the other ear is going to be hiding behind the head a little bit. That and the bottom part in kind of in relation to the eye there, part here. It's going to have a little curve and then come up to it, curve down, around, and then this area here. We have where it's over. So, and I just want to tilt this back a little further. Okay, and should be pretty good. The sound might be a little long. Let's shorten it just a little bit. There we go. Yeah, I think that's better. Now for the feet, they kind of have two little like toes almost. So I'm gonna kind of make a little bit of a triangle shape here, and then another little triangle shape. Okay, splitting it down the middle, and then kind of curving it and angling it up. So it's almost like a little V in the middle, something like that. Now I'm gonna lighten up the sketch and then get to painting it. In the sketch, I'm getting it really light because it's gonna be a really pale pink and I don't want the pencil showing through. For the painting, I'm gonna start with a wash of pale pink. This is just basically the pinks that are in my palette, which has reds, greens, some yellows probably, but mostly permanent rose with just a tad bit of yellows and a tad bit of greens to mute it. But I'm just making that a really pale wash. So I like to just leave what's in my palette here and use it. So I'm not wasting paint, but it also makes for interesting mixtures sometimes. Okay, so I'm just getting a lot of water and I'm adding that pale wash of pink to my entire pig. I'm just gonna make sure that the pig's still wet on these first parts that I painted especially. And then I'm gonna add a little bit of green to some of the shadow areas. So green and pink make brown. So by adding that contrasting color, it creates a shadow. So I'm putting it on both of the back legs, or both of the legs that are farther from us, which I'm calling back. And then take a little bit and add it to the bottom of the head. And I went around on the belly, ready? And then just a little bit along the side of the face and the nose. Now I'm gonna lift out some highlights. So on the back leg here, lift out a highlight, maybe behind this leg as well, and then a little bit on the back side. Now I'm gonna add a little bit of clean water on the left side here because I want that to wash out a little bit. Now I did drop some in there, so I'm gonna re-add some of my pink wash there so that it doesn't cauliflower too much. That will also get a little bit of a bleed, so I get a little bit of a lost edge on the back side, which is what I'm going for. Now I need to add just a little bit of bleeding into the ground as well. So make the feet bleed out a little bit, and I'll add some darker tones to that as well. So I'm gonna mix some pink with my green and add that in to get some browns in the ground. Splatter a little bit of pink as well. And these are very pale splatters, so they're not gonna show up too much, very watery, but just to get a little bit of texture into the background. Now I'm gonna let that dry and then do another layer on the pig. Okay, so another wash of pink over the pig. Back to my greens here, mixing in some red and some green to make a brown, adding darker areas. So I'm adding it to the front of the legs that are closer to us, just to give a little bit of dimension and definition. Bottom of the head here, and this ear a little bit. Inside is going to be all shadowed. And the same with this ear. Here, I'm just negative painting around that fold in the ear and dragging some of that shadow down onto the head. Let's make this a little bit darker of a shadow. Some of the darker areas. Wet on wet. Now I'm going to add some brown patches onto the pig. So add a little bit of brown hair. I guess pigs have hair, not fur. The back, just some various places. And I'm going to mix up just actually some burnt umber, some sepia, Payne's gray to make it a nice rich dark brown, and tap some of that in to the wet areas that I just painted. And that'll give it a little bit of variety in the areas, but make it nice and dark. Okay, let me add a couple more. I just wanted to do it while it was wet so that it wouldn't, so that it would bleed out a little bit more. My brown with the green and pink mixed. Add that in for some stronger shadows. Now, add a little bit of a shadow across the middle of the head. Okay, now texture is going to pull this together. So I'm going to take some pink, just a really pale wash, load my brush with it. And my brush doesn't have very much water in it. Laying my brush nearly parallel to the page and dragging it across. In some of the highlighted areas, I don't want to have as much texture. And some of the areas like the legs that are going down, or the hair is growing down. So I'm angling my brush down instead of back. So for the back, I'm angling it back. So now I'm going to do the snout. So I'm going to get my green and pink mixture here and get in the nose part that is in shadow. Okay, get some darker brown here with sepia, and I'm just tapping it in. Let that dry, and I'm just going to use a tiny bit of my brown mixture to hint at the mouth here. A bit more separation here between the back of the jaw and the neck. Now I'm going to get the eyes in, so just a nice dark mixture. And I'm basically just going to dot an eye in on this side. Can't really see much of it. This side is going to be a half circle, a line on top essentially. I'm going to add some brighter pink. I'm watering it down, but this is permanent rose along the nose. Nice and dark. Add in Payne's gray for a nostril. You're not really going to see it much, but that's good. And then I'm going to take my brown mixture, but not too much. Nice light mixture and negative paint around the highlight on the top of this. Pull some of that same color back from that area to try to create a shadow. Adding another layer of darkness to the back legs that are behind the belly, more texture into some areas. Add some water to let some of it blend out. Okay, now let me come down and work on the feet some more. Okay, so I'm just adding in the little toe shapes on the hooves. Okay, and then I'm just adding a little bit of the green onto the hooves to tone them down so they're not super bright pink. And then I'm just gonna pull out some dry brush texture from those hooves. Tapping in just a little bit more of the green and pink, bleed out. Okay, I'm just gonna add in some splatters, and then I'm gonna come in and add just a little separation between the hooves, the toes, after it's dry. Okay, I'm just gonna take a light wash of my brown with that. Then I'm just dry brushing because I wanted a little bit more texture into that ground. I do want to add just a little bit of a highlight over the nose. This is just a white pastel pencil. We'll just add some texture and a little bit of bright highlights. And there is our completed pig. For the second pig, I'm going to do the pig like laying down in some flowers. So I'm going to start with just getting the basic shape of the body. So just kind of a curve, like the hip here. The legs are pointed out that way, so we're not going to see them. Kind of simplifies it a little bit. The back curves around, and then there's just a tiny bump for the shoulder maybe. And then we're going to have the bottom part here, have where the belly is, and we'll have an arm coming off here. Kind of an almost straight line down. Actually, I'm going to angle it forward just a little bit. And then there's an elbow there, just slightly below where the belly is. And then it curves around like a wrist area. And we'll have the little toes here. And then it's going to come back up from that spot, up a little higher than that first angle that we had here for the wrist, and come back the body. And then have face coming down here between arms. We have the little lower part of the jaw, little mouth, and then this is where that snout is going to be. So it's going to come out a little bit farther. And then the bottom part here, that's almost flat, curves up, and then it kind of comes to a soft like curved point at the top, and come back just a little bit there. Be some little wrinkles on the nose, and then it'll come out just a little bit here for the curve of the head. Now, coming off of where that curve is, we have the other arm out. I get the top one first, so we'll have the ear kind of there. So to make sure there's enough space here, there's the arm down, and I don't want it to go too much below where this one is. So it's gonna come out to like here. It's gonna come up just a little bit to that little wrist area, and then curve down the toes in. Feel it? Okay. I think I'm gonna make this now a little bit longer now that I got the arms in, just to improve on the proportions a little bit. Okay? So this comes out here, goes in just a little bit. All right, I think that's okay there. I might widen here just a little bit, angle it in a little more. Then we go again, kind of indicate some of those wrinkles. Okay, let's get in the eyes and ears to help with making sure that everything is the correct proportions. So the eye on this side is going to kind of come up from where the mouth is, and I'm going to kind of angle in from this bend in the arm and then line that up, like triangulate it. Okay, and then we're going to have a little circle here for the eye and just a little bit of a rounded diamond shape to it. And then on the other side, it's going to come up from the edge of the snout, making sure that it's the same height as the other one. And this one is going to be more at an angle, so it's going to be smaller looking. Now we're going to get ears in, and that should help the look a little bit to make it look more like a pig. Okay, so up from the eye, get that ear. This side's kind of behind a little bit, so we're going to get that curve in, and then the top part is going to curve around and come out to a point. The other side's got to connect into the head a little bit more, curve that around, and then bring it out to meet that point. For the other ear, I'm going to again use like the relation to the eye, so straight up from the middle of this eye, and then near the bottom of this other ear is where the inside portion of the ear is going to go, and up, and then kind of curve it around out to the side, and then a little extra curve there. And then the other side is a nice kind of wide scoop, and then there'll be kind of the darkness in here. Just gonna kind of clean up some of these lines a little bit, make sure that I'm happy with where they're going. I think I'm gonna extend this arm a little bit. Just getting those hooves back in, curving this side up on the nose just a little bit more. And then I just want to widen this arm slightly, make it a little bit more substantial. And then I'm going to do mums for the flowers on the whimsical version, because mums are the birth month flower for November. Mums tend to be kind of rounded, bushier plants, so I'm going to try to get some of that roundedness, but I don't want it to be so rounded that it looks like pristine, like somebody came and pruned them into that shape. So I'm gonna make them kind of sprawling, but in a rounded-ish pattern. And they're really dense flowers. So the bushy part, there's lots of greenery and then tons of flowers on them. So it's gonna be very dense. And then these are just gonna be very loose representations of mums. I'm not gonna be super precise with them. Now I'm going to lighten up the sketch, and then we'll get to painting. And the pig is going to be pink and pretty pale, so I'm going to get the edges nice and light so that I can paint it really light and not have to worry about the pencil lines showing through. I'm going to start with a size 16 round brush, which is very large, just to get the first wash on the pig, and I'm using permanent rose here. There is a little bit of other stuff mixed in this well that it's kind of muting it down a little bit, so some of my reds, also some greens in this area, so it's just muting it a little bit. But I'm getting a lot of water and just adding that pale pink to the pig. And though this brush is pretty large, it does have a nice point, so I can get into some of the small areas easily. Just going around the eyes a little bit so that I can put a highlight in on them. I'm gonna add some clean water to the background, just letting it touch the back of the pig to get some parts of that washed out, and just adding water up into the sky. Take a little bit of a damp brush and kind of work on the edges there, add just a little bit more pink into the pig, and it'll create some cauliflowers, and I'm okay with that. It doesn't have to be all perfectly smooth. Some areas if it's bleeding a little bit too much, take a damp, very slightly damp clean brush and just drag it along the edge, and that will help clean up some of that. On the side of the pig here where I'm going to put in some mums, I'm adding some clean water to force some backgrounds, and that'll give me a little bit more wiggle room to add flowers on top of there. Now the flowers I'm going to do are kind of the traditional fall mum colors, so I'm going to do like oranges, like dark reds, maroons, and maybe some yellows too. So now I'm going to add in just a little bit of green, very small amount, to some of the shadowed areas, just to get a little bit of wet on wet blending here into those shadows. And I'm using green because it's the contrasting color for pink, so it'll create a nice neutral shadow once I add more layers of the pink on. So I'm doing it kind of where the arm meets the head here, and then along the bottom of the arm, and then same on the other side. I did it where the head is against the arm, and then a little bit into the ears, and then maybe in front of the ears a little bit where there'd be some shadow from the ears, and a little bit on the body just to define the shapes where the legs would be meeting the body. And then here I'm just kind of sweeping in a curved motion to get some roundness to the pig. Okay, maybe a little bit on the top also like that. Okay, clean, dry out my brush, and then lift a little bit on this edge where it bled out slightly farther than I wanted it to into the background. Again, this pale of a pink color is not going to affect what I'm putting around the pig really, because I'm doing darker colors, so I'm not that worried about it. Okay, now we're gonna let that dry and then work on the next layer. Now I'm gonna add in another layer of my pink, but I'm gonna avoid the parts that I want to be the most highlighted. So the back of the pig, I'm gonna kind of avoid, and then I'll add a few spots on the head and the ears that I want to stay highlighted also. Getting obviously some hard edges here, so I'm just gonna add some clean water and scrub that out a little bit. And just lifting out a little bit. Let's let that dry and then do another layer. I'm gonna do a wash of a very pale glaze, basically of yellow. It's kind of yellow ochre, to warm it up a little bit and kind of knock back that pink and turn it a little bit more peach. And some more of that water to soften that back edge a little bit. And then I'm gonna add in some dark areas to make it the same type of pig as the last pig that I did. So I'm gonna put in some brown greens here. It's olive green mixed with some burnt umber. And then I'll add in some more darkness after, but I'm just gonna get in some of that color in some splotchies. And then I'm gonna take some darker color, so some sepia mixed with some Payne's gray, dab off extra water, tap that in to those dark splotches, get some blends and bleeds, give it some variety. Here I'm kind of pulling some of it back into the drier areas to give it that little bit of texture. I'm gonna lift just a little bit because it's getting a little too like spiderwebby on the edges of these last two. And then I'm gonna add in a more just dry brush, and I'm kind of dragging some around the splotches, get a little bit of extra texture, and then I'll dry brush a little bit of pink also, some really pale pink. I don't want very much on my brush at all, and very little water. Brush that in on top. And I want it to be super pale because this is a highlighted area, so I don't want much color at all on my brush. I just want to add a little bit of that texture. So some of the darker areas, the shadowed areas, I am adding a little bit of color just to get some separation between the parts of the pig, the areas that are shadowed. Now I'm going to work on the face a little bit, so I'm going to get a smaller brush. So this is a size 8 round, and I'm going to add a little bit of my shadowy pink color, so that's the green and pink, a little bit of brown mixed in, burnt umber. Add that to some of the darkest areas. Really work on the ears now. These have a bit of a glowy look to them, so I'm going to add a little bit of Milo in and then blend that out to get that translucence. Okay, drop in a little bit more darkness into the base of the ear where the bowl is coming up. Pull that out just a little bit more shadow behind the ear to separate it from the body. And for the other ear, the inside, the darker, add some slight darkness along the edge. Okay, I need to do light wash on the outside. Slight shadow where the mouth is. I'm gonna add some wrinkles on the nose now. Couple of them a little bit darker. Now I'm gonna add a little bit more brown to some of the darkest areas. Okay, now I'm gonna let that dry and then do just a little bit more dry brushing for some more texture. So made sure my brush was very little water and then holding it very low to the page, so horizontal. And just kind of adding a little bit of texture, especially around the dark patches, just to blend them in a little bit more and add a little bit more interest to the pig. And it's kind of smoothing out some of the transitions between the shadowed areas and the highlights also by adding the texture. Now I'm going to come in and do the nose and the eyes. So the nose, I'm going to make it a darker and slightly warmer version of the pink. I'm going to add just a tiny bit of burnt umber in, a little bit of green, and then I'm going to paint that in first along the bottom of the nose where it's the darkest. Clean out my brush, dry it off mostly, and then touch in just a little bit of water to make that bleed out. And then I'm going to add in a little bit of Payne's Gray. And I want to make sure I don't have very much water because it's a small area, so it will take over very quickly. And just touch that in along the bottom and the darkest areas, so kind of where the nostrils are. And then I'm going to add just a small amount of shadow, so that brownish pink color around the top of the nose. And I'm leaving a little bit of almost white as a highlight. Then along the side here, I'm going to kind of blend the two shadow colors together. Clean and dry my brush. Touch the top there to blend out that shadow color into the rest of the snout so that it's not just a line. And then touch the nose itself to blend out just a little bit more. Now for the eyes, I'm just going to add a nice dark mix of sepia and Payne's Gray. And I want to make sure to leave a little bit of a highlight, but if I miss it, I can add it in later with a little bit of touch of pastel pencil or white gouache or something. Okay, so a little circle, a little line to pull it out and make it that slightly almond shape. Okay, and then I'm just going to tap around in the eye so that I leave that white space. Okay, I'm going to take some Payne's Gray and tap that in as well to get just a little bit of variety. Okay, for the other side, it's a completely different angle, so I'm going to do that first angle of the top lid first and then tap around in a little half circle and then add again just a very small amount of Payne's Gray. Okay, good. Just kind of touch in a tiny bit more darkness into the nose with that color. Okay, and then a little bit more kind of texture and darkness into the ear here where it would be darkest. Now for the foot here, I need to define the separation between those little toes. So I'm using just brown here. Well, brown, green, pink, you know, the brown that I used for the brown shadows. I added a line down the middle and on the bottom, and then I just used that paint that I added to pull it over the little toes, but not completely, so it still has a little bit of a highlight. And I'm just touching some slightly darker brown in. Same idea for this other foot. And this one I think I'm gonna kind of cover with flowers anyway, so I'm not gonna make it as dark, and I'm not super concerned with it looking as realistic. So now we're gonna move on to the flowers. Okay, so I'm gonna start with a nice big brush and add in clean water along the bottom, actually all around. Okay. And I am gonna go over some of the spots where I want the flowers to go over the pig, and then being careful to go around the spots where I want the flowers to be around. Now that it's all wet, I'm gonna add in some greens, and I'm gonna use olive green and just kind of touch that in all the way around. And then I'm adding just a little bit of darker green in some areas just to get some variety even in this first wash here. Then I'm gonna add in some splatters to create some texture in that green. And it's all really wet right now, so it's not gonna stay like perfect little circles of splatter texture. Okay, now I'm gonna add in some yellow splatters to be some yellow flowers. And I kind of want to cluster some of them because, like I said, mums grow in little clusters. So I'll do my clusters of yellow in a few areas. And I want them to be a little bit thicker in the front and thinner in the back. So I'm adding more water when I tap into the back. And then I'm going to do the same thing with some oranges. And I'm going to mute that orange down by adding some yellow ochre to it because I don't want it to be a super bright, vivid orange. So some areas I'm even going ahead and touching the paper and just letting big areas bleed out. And then some dark reds. So I'm going to use Perlene Maroon for that. And it's a nice, like, again, obviously it's called maroon, maroony red. And I'm tilting my page up so that some of these bleed up kind of into the pig, and then for the back I want it to actually bleed away from the pig, so that's why I have it tilted this direction. I think that's good on kind of the clusters. I'm going to add in just a little bit of orange, tapping it in. Now this area is kind of bleeding here. If you don't like that, just take a towel and gently dab it up. I'm going to add just a little bit of blue now into the sky area. So this is just cerulean blue, and then let that bleed out and do its thing. And then I'm just going to kind of tap the back side of the pig to get a little bit of a highlight there, and then just add in a tiny bit more of the green. Now I definitely need to let this dry before I start with the next layer. There's a little bit of warping on my paper, so the blue is kind of pulling in the middle there. So I'm just gonna lift some of that back out and away, tilt it back up, add just a little bit more dots in of my various colors here, especially this red because it's blending with the green and making it look a little bit muddy, which, you know, not that big of a deal because these are supposed to be fall colors. So if it's a little bit muted because it's fall colors, that's perfectly fine. Okay, I don't want to go much darker on this first layer. I don't want to tilt it back down, and my table is slightly angled down. So I'm just going to put my towel under to let it dry, but to kind of force it upward while it dries. My page is dry now, so I'm going to come in first and clean up a little bit of this cauliflowering that I don't appreciate. So I'm going to wet the page and just blend it out. And that's where I want a lost edge anyway. So it's okay if I literally just blend out that entire edge. Okay, now we're going to start working on some of the mums. I'm going to take some yellow first, and I'm just going to take some of that color and very small dabs onto the yellow areas just to create some texture into that yellow. And this is kind of the focal point, so it's where I want the plant to have the most texture in that area. Okay? Getting some very concentrated paint and dabbing some of that in. Okay, and then I'll add in some darks also. Now a little bit looser paint, but same idea back here, just dabbing around to get some texture into those mums. They have tons of little tiny petals. I'm not gonna paint each petal, but I'm just getting little like round flower shapes. Now I'm gonna take some of my orange and just dab that in around on some of these yellow. Maybe they have the petals that transition from orange on the middle to yellow on the outside. I'm really happy with that section. I like the orange, almost looks like kind of a shadow. And here it's a little bit more dabby to look more petally. I'm gonna add in some yellow ochre as well, just to get that transition from the yellow to orange a little bit more subtle. And this I'm trying to do the little dabs in kind of circular shapes, again, to look like little rounded flowers. Okay, so then I'm just going to do that same technique on the orange and the maroon. And again, that orange, I'm mixing it with yellow ochre to tone it down a little bit. It's just a little too bright. If you want to tone it down even more, add a little bit of blue. For the maroon, I'm being a lot looser and I am doing a paler wash because I really don't want this maroon to just take over the painting. It is a very dark and intense color. And if I go too dark here on the edge, it's going to really pull the eye away from my focal point. So I'm keeping it a little bit more intense over toward the orange and then letting it fade out a little bit more as I move away, and also letting just some of those old bleeds, previous layer bleeds, just shine really there. Now I'm going to loosen up some of the maroon. Again, I want this to be nice and pale, and I'm just going to add in a little bit more texture and darkness along the back, a little bit in the background here. Okay. Just getting a little tiny bit more darkness and tapping that into the wet paint. It'll bleed out, so it's not super defined, but it adds a little bit more variety. Now I'm going to start adding some greens. So start with the light wash and get it blended in to the background a little bit. So I'm just tapping it in between some of the flowers there. I'm going to outline this ear with a little bit more concentrated color. So just kind of negative painting around that ear. Maybe here there's some that haven't bloomed yet. We're not all the way. So just kind of dry brushing, super pale color there. Okay, and as I come forward, I'm going to get a little bit thicker paint and get just a little bit darker in some of these areas. Clean up some of the edges of my pig here. Okay, and then kind of tap in some of that darkness around the flowers in between. And this would be kind of the area that would be the darkest in terms of the green. So I'm adding a little bit of Prussian blue to it just to darken it some, because this would be really shadowed right in between these flowers. And then as I come toward the front, I really want to kind of wash it out a little bit more. And it's going to be kind of like a vignette where it's washed out toward the edge. So I'm just going to, again, copy that same technique in the rest of these more defined flowers. And I just want a little bit of the green poking through. Again, mums are super dense, so a lot of it really is just a ball of flowers. Tap in some more greens toward the base. And I'm just trying to tap really randomly so that it's not too uniform. I'm going to put just a little bit more like yellow so that he's sniffing a flower there. And then I wanted a few flowers kind of crushed under this arm. They're kind of sticking out. Okay, a little bit of splatter. So there's some yellow, some orange. Loosen it up for the background. A little bit more orange. And then just a very small amount of the red. Okay, lift it up off the pig. I'm just going to add a touch more into these orange flowers. And I really want to kind of shadow it. So I'm going to add a little bit of my Prussian blue to really tone it down and make it a more brown orange. Okay, and then that's going to just give me a little bit of a shadow color to tap in various places. Just because the orange one was looking a little bit flat. Just going to add a little bit more darkness to the little hoof here, and then a touch more to the edge of those also. And then I'm just adding a little bit of this actual maroon mix that I have. It's a little bit brownish to some of the shadows on the pig. There it is, my finished whimsical pig. I do need to dry this before I sign it though. Okay, I'm going to take my white pastel pencil and just add a couple of little highlights. So like the top of this ear, I want it to stand out a little bit more. Same over here. A little bit of texture into the forehead. So I'm brushing up quickly and then rubbing it out with my finger. I like the highlight on the nose. I'm going to add just a little one on the front. The eyes are pretty good. Maybe just a little bit along the back edge and into this dark patch just to give it some variety. Oops, maybe they have some shine on them. There we go. third pig is going to be a cute little baby pig, and it's going to be kind of sprawled out. So I'm going to start with getting in kind of the back angles just slightly down, kind of curve up, and then we're going to have an ear here, comes up like so, a little curve on the top, and curve around toward the head. The back of the head is going to be an extension of this line. There's the kind of top of the head, the back of the head, top of the head, and it curves around, and then we'll have the other ear kind of here. It's going to be about the same height as this ear. It's going to curve and kind of flatten out, and then a little kind of point there, then it widens out, and head, then a bit of bump here. Okay, now to get backside in. So it's going to angle down this way toward the legs. We're going to have a little bump of a leg here. It's going to come out to the foot. Okay, here's the leg. Make sure it's pretty flat. He's really just sprawled out. Okay, and we're going to have the belly coming here. And then the arm is going to start back kind of where this ear comes in. I'm going to finish the shape of this ear real quick because it's got to connect to the head, not just to the neck, right? So get that ear in. We have where the darkness is out, little wrinkles, and while I'm at it, getting in ear stuff, I'm going to go up and put in this other too, get some of the darkness in. So the back, the edge of this ear is where the arm's going to come out, and so it kind of comes down to an elbow here. Curves, follows the same angle as the belly, basically, and then comes down to the little foot. So I'm getting the line in for the toes there, and then curving that down, and on the other side, arm gets a little bit wider for there. Okay, something like that. The other leg is going to come off where that arm is, basically, and then it's angled up just a little bit, and then go down, toes in, okay, something like that. And then I'm going to get in the neck. So I'm using the reference of my arm here for where the neck's going to come up. So it's kind of forearm area, and it's going to go up, curve around a little bit, and then another little curve for a little cheek, and then it's going to angle in toward the ear and kind of just come straight up there. Here's a little chin area. So you get that kind of in so that I know to shade below it just a little bit. Then I'm going to get the eyes in next. So the eyes are going to sit pretty close to the ears for the top, and I get wide eyes, cartoony shapes here. Another one off the side a little bit. He's faced away from us. It should be a little bit higher. It should be a little bit closer to the ears. It looks like a frog with giant ears right now, but we're going to add in the snout, and that will help. So we're going to get the nose in, and I'm going to really kind of exaggerate it. It's going to be an upside down heart shape, and the mouth come in, a little smiling pig. Okay, nostrils, put in some little wrinkles on the little snout so that you can really tell, and we'll add some shading to bring it out just a little bit. So instead of adding the mouth how I did, I'm going to try to make it, I'm kind of reimagining how I'm drawing it. So I'm drawing the bottom edge of the snout, and that's kind of fixing that mouth for me. So sometimes it's just a matter of what you're thinking when you're drawing, and it'll change the idea. So instead of drawing a mouth, I'm drawing bottom edge of the snout, and that looks way better, which is just kind of interesting that changing your mindset can change what it turns out like. So again, this will be the chin. So this will all be shaded down here because it's underneath and it'll be in shadow. I think I'm going to angle this a little bit more forward. Yeah, that's better. I like that shape better for that foot. The eyes. Now, I have been arguing with eyes lately, so I try to get this in a way that I'm happy with, just less angle there. And then I need to decide where I'm going to put the iris. Okay, yeah, I like that. So he's looking back toward us. He's turned just slightly away, and he's looking back toward us. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. Now I just have to dial in this back foot a little bit, and it's kind of, I'm running out of room, so I'm going to make him a little bit shorter, so it'll make it look like he's angled a little bit farther away from us. It's called foreshortening, so it's kind of just a trick of perspective, but we'll kind of make it that work in our favor to fit the leg on the page a little bit better. There's a little back foot. He's got a little like high heel toe on the back, and then I'm going to put a little curly tail on, which I think is just going to really dial in the cuteness factor of the little pig having that little curly tail. All right, There we go. So can just kind of indicate a little bit of shading here, slightly more angular in the back, not quite so curvy. So now I'm going to lighten up this sketch and then get to painting. I'm going to start with a light wash of pink. So I'm going to kind of clean off a spot of my well here that's my pinks. I'm going to move around a little bit of that paint. I'm not going to get rid of it necessarily, just kind of pushing it toward the bottom. And I'm going to get some cleaner permanent rose, just so that it's a little bit more of that clean pink color. And I'm just going to put a wash of that over my entire pig. I am going to go around the eyes so that I can have a nice highlight in the eyes. And I am using a size 16 round brush here. So it's pretty big, but it comes to a decent point, so I can still go around the edges and around small areas without an issue. It's just a matter of keeping the paint wet so that it doesn't create any hard edges. So using the bigger brush that holds more water and paint, I don't have to reload as often. I can cover more area more quickly, and it allows me to cover the whole pig without getting any hard edges. Just lightly going over the whole pig again to make sure that it's all evenly wet and dries at a similar rate to prevent hard edges. And then I'm going to take just a little bit of green and drop that in to some of my darker areas for some shadow. And I'm using green because it's the contrasting color for pink. And so that'll create a nice warm shadow when I add in more layers of my pink. Any areas that I want to be a specific highlight, I'm going to clean and dry off my brush and lift out some of that pink. So like the top of the head here, I want it to actually be a softer edge. So I'm gonna wet that up and lift out, and then a little bit along the back. And it's all still wet, so I can drop in a little bit of paint without worrying about it cauliflowering too much. If I get a little cauliflowering, not super concerned, but I don't want it to cauliflower a lot. Just got to make sure I'm not adding a lot of water in when I add in that extra paint. And then I'm just watching it as it dries, and if there's any cauliflowers, I'm blending them out with a very minimally damp brush. So now I'm going to let this dry completely and then come back and do another layer. I'm going to add a second layer of super pale pink to the pig, and then I'm going to do some more shadows. So this is more about just getting it wet again than about adding color. And soften up this other ear just a little bit. Just add some clean water, scrub just a little bit, dab it out. Okay, now I'm going to add a little bit of my green into my pink here. Okay, more pink than green on this one. And then tapping that in along the shadowed areas. Okay, I'm going to switch to a smaller brush here and get a more concentrated version of my shadow mix. And then I'm going to tap that in. And it's not going to bleed out the same. It's not going to bleed out as much because it's much more concentrated. Anywhere that I want it blended out a little bit, I just clean and dry off my brush, introduce a little bit of water away from that line, and then just touch the line to let it blend out, softening this edge a little bit. Okay, now I'm going to take a little bit of burnt umber and mix it with that shadow mix so that it's a darker mix, maybe even a little bit of Payne's Gray, so it's a little bit cooler. And then I'm going to add that to this back arm, which is going to be kind of the darkest area here. And then I'll go in and clean that up a little bit more when it's dry. Okay, I want to add in a little bit of darkness behind this arm here. Oh, it's wet. I thought it was dry. It's okay. I can just lift that back up and let me go ahead and dry it so that I can get those defined shadows. Now, that darker pink color is a little bit on the purpley side, and I'm going to add in the shadow behind this arm. Soften that edge. Okay, that looks pretty good. Okay, a little bit more darkness to this back leg. Then just a touch more right below the chin. I'm going to get a light brown wash and add in some dark patches to various areas. So I kind of want one here on the leg, one kind of on the belly, one kind of on the back, maybe one on the shoulder here. Okay, while those are wet, I'm going to add in some Payne's Gray mixed with sepia so that it's still a little bit warm, and drop that in, clean and dry off my brush, and pull some of that out a little bit. And I'm just dry brushing some of that paint, pulling it up and out of the patches to blend it in with the rest of the pig. There's some hairs growing up into those that are pinker. This one on the back, I want to maintain a highlight, so I'm going to lift out some of the paint so that it's lighter on the top, and then just pull in a little bit more of that darkness toward the bottom to add just a little touch of darkness on the tail. He's got a little patch there too. Okay, now I'm going to take my same brush, dry it off really good, and take my pale pink and dry brush some of that color into those patches just to get some texture around them so that they blend in nicely. I'm going to add just a little bit of my shadowy pink mixture to the side of the face that's turned away from us to kind of push that back and away, especially around the eye. I'll give it a little bit more depth, like that nose is popping forward. Okay. And then same just under where the top of the snout is, add in a little bit of shadow. Now I'm going to work on the ears a little bit, so I'm going to add just a little bit of darkness into the middle of the ear. So I'm just using kind of a brown mix, pulling that out where there's some little folds. Now for an even darker mix, the Payne's Gray mix that I used in the black brown skin splotches. Add that in. I'm just going to put in a little bit of darker pink. Blend it out. A little bit of a shadow under the ear. Okay, same for this back here. Kind of add in a little bit of shadow. Okay, and then just some shadows for the little wrinkles on the nose. And then I'm going to soften those just a little bit, introducing just a small amount of clean water there. Lifting this one out because it's a little too far back. For the nose, I'm going to do a brighter pink color. Or not brighter, but I guess more vivid pink. Now I'm going to do just a small line of color under the mouth just to really pull it out. Let me add in just a little bit on the nose here. Same on the back, just a touch. Tiny little shadow here for the tail. Touch more pinkness to the inside of the ears. Push that cartooniness there. Okay, now I'm going to do the nostrils. So we have the darkest area, middle, okay, and then a very small amount of water to blend that out. For the eyes, I'm going to make them green to contrast with the pink. We'll do a little bit of an olivey green color. This is olive mixed with sap green, so it's not straight olive green. Now I'm going to go around the iris and then tap in that color so that it's not solid. You want to make sure to leave a highlight. I'll just add in a little bit more concentrated color. Just let that bleed out a little bit. Let that dry. And then I'll add in the dark for the pupil. Okay, make sure I don't have very much paint on my brush. And then just use the very tip to dot in that dark color. Again, making sure to leave a highlight. I need just a little bit more of my green. Gotta make sure that my brush does not have very much water on it, because I really don't want this to get out of control. Clean out my brush, and then I just want a slight shadow on the eyes themselves. So I'm just going to take a little bit of my same brownish color that I used for the shadows on the pig and get that in on the edges of the eyes, because the eyes are set into the head, so they wouldn't be pure white right under the eyelid. Okay, and then I'm just going to take a little bit of my brown mixture here, but watered down, and kind of line the eyes a little bit. Now I'm going to take a larger brush and introduce some water into the bottom part. Just touch the edge of the pig to soften it out. Okay. And then same around the back. So I don't want to go crazy over the pig with blending it out or scrubbing over it, because I don't want it to blend out, but I want there to be a nice soft transition from the background to the pig. So I'm going to go over the pig a little bit, and then I'm just going to add some green under the pig. Let it bleed up toward the pig a little bit. A little bit darker right up close. And then some cerulean blue for the sky. Okay, so I'm just dabbing the edges of the pig where I don't want to get cauliflowers. Just a little bit of green right along the edge to incorporate the pig into the ground a little bit. Okay, once it dries, I'll add just a little bit more grassy texture. Okay, I'm gonna take a stiffer brush here and get some of my green paint. Make sure it doesn't have too much water on it. And just use that to dry brush a little bit of grassiness. There is my baby pig.
Thank you so much for watching today. I really hope you enjoyed it. And just remember that these cards are available for sale on my website if you don't feel like having a go at it yourself. Have an awesome day.